Welcome to Life Extension's webinar series. My name is Dr. Michael Smith. I'm the Clinical Information Specialist here at Life Extension. And today we're going to talk about 4 steps for every diabetic. Now, before we begin, I have to let everybody know that the information we present is only meant to be informative. It's not meant to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure disease. And of course, please talk with your own doctor before starting any diet or exercise program. In 2003, Time Magazine asked the question, diabetes, are you at risk? And the answer to that question is, yeah, we all are. You don't have to be a diabetic to suffer the consequences of high blood sugar. There's a really interesting study that was done out of the UK, and it's called the Whitehall study. This is kind of like UK's version of the Framingham population study that we're doing here in the United States. And the Whitehall study clearly shows a link between high blood sugar and cardiovascular mortality. Now, notice the authors of the Whitehall study. They don't say diabetes and cardiovascular risk. They say high blood sugar. The point that they make in the Whitehall study, which, by the way, had almost 18,000 men, the point they make is you don't have to be a diabetic to be at risk for some of the medical consequences that diabetics suffer. Slight elevations in blood sugar put you at risk for things like heart attacks, strokes, and kidney problems. Now, at Life Extension, we often use some different numbers than your traditional doctor will use when it comes to blood testing, and this is really true for blood sugar. There's 3 main tests that I would suggest for anybody. That's fasting blood sugar, a fasting blood insulin, and what is called hemoglobin A1C. Now, fasting blood sugar, the optimal range, and by the way, fasting blood sugar is usually found on a standard chemistry panel, but a fasting blood sugar optimal range is between 70 and 85. A hemoglobin A1C optimal range should be less than 5, and a fasting blood insulin should be less than 5 also. And you can compare that to what traditional doctors would consider normal. So at Life Extension, we have some, tougher numbers here for you to try to achieve, but we think that's important when it comes to overall longevity and overall health and wellness. Quite honestly, the numbers that most traditional doctors use, they're leaving some people at risk. So we go by these optimal ranges. So keep this slide here, take it to your doctor, and compare what you've recently had with blood testing to Life Extension's optimal values. This is where health and wellness begins, with these kind of numbers. So the question is how can we best protect ourselves against the damaging effects of high blood sugar? So in order to answer this, we need to identify and counteract the main problems associated with high blood sugar. And what I'm about to show you is a graph that kind of sums up the problem with hyperglycemia, high blood sugar levels. And when you look at this graph, there's 3 main pathways that sugar, when you have too much sugar in your blood, there's 3 main pathways this sugar can kind of filter down into that causes all the problems. And one of the pathways has to do with how your body manages the sugar, how your body metabolizes the sugar. Another pathway, the middle one, the middle arrow you see here on the screen, that has to do with what is called glycation. We're going to talk about that coming up. And then the third pathway is really this, what we call auto-oxidation with glucose. Glucose causes oxidative stress. So based on this graph, when you look at it, this is how glucose causes problems. This is how blood sugar causes problems. We've identified 4 things that we want you to focus on. These are the 4 things, the 4 steps that every diabetic should follow. And quite honestly, based on the Whitehall study, 4 steps that all of us should focus on. 1 is preventing sugar spikes. 2 is helping insulin work better so your body metabolizes the sugar better. 3 is to prevent those glycation pathways. And 4, to ease oxidative stress. The 4 steps you're looking at right here come from this graph. The 4 steps are specifically designed to target the problems that arise when you have too much blood sugar. So let's look at the first one, preventing sugar spikes. Now, when you eat food, your blood sugar level naturally will go up. The question is how fast does it go up and how high does that blood sugar go up? The sugary the foods that you're eating, what we call high glycemic index foods, the faster that rises in blood sugar. We call it a spike. You do not want to spike blood sugar. Spiking blood sugar leads to insulin resistance, which is the hallmark of type 2 diabetes. Instead of eating food that spikes blood sugar, you want to eat food that has a nice gentle rise in blood sugar. When the body is, when you have a slow rise in blood sugar, the body is able to manage that blood sugar better. Those are called low glycemic foods. So when you look at this graph, you do not want to be eating foods that put you in that red graph. You want to be in the yellow graph. You want to be eating foods that does increase blood sugar a little bit because you do need sugar. That's the body's main energy source, but you don't want to spike it. Spiking leads to insulin resistance in type 2 diabetes. Now, the easiest thing to do then is to eat foods that are low glycemic. However, even when we do that, because we've been eating such a bad diet for a long time, we tend to really spike our blood sugar levels all the time. So what we can do for you is offer some suggestions that you can do with your meals to help prevent these sugar spikes. In particular, what I've listed here are apple cider vinegar, cinnamon extract, and the mineral vanadyl sulfate. Those three suggestions will help you prevent sugar spikes when you're done eating a meal. Step number 2 is to improve insulin sensitivity. Now, insulin is the hormone that is responsible for allowing glucose to come from your blood into the cell. That's what this picture shows. The insulin is here in yellow, the little yellow circles, and the blue circles are glucose. So when you eat food, carbohydrates, those carbohydrates are broken down into the glucose molecule, the sugar molecule. In response to that, the pancreas makes insulin. Insulin binds to its own receptor on the cell surface, which then activates the glucose receptor, which then allows the glucose to go from outside the cell to inside the cell. The problem is when we're eating too many sugars and spiking sugar all the time after we eat, that causes too much insulin to be released. And over a lifetime of doing that, it kind of damages the insulin receptors. And when the insulin receptors don't work, the cells don't like the insulin. They become kind of insensitive to the insulin. And when the cell becomes insensitive to the insulin, it does not activate the glucose receptor. That's the black X I got over that blue receptor there. So when you are eating too much sugar, too much insulin gets dumped into the system. The insulin receptors kind of become insensitive to the insulin, and that means glucose cannot go from the outside to the inside of the cell. The result is hyperglycemia, too much blood sugar. So not only do we have to, number one, prevent sugar spikes, we also need to make sure insulin works better. We need to improve insulin sensitivity. Here are the top 3 suggestions for improving insulin sensitivity. The first one here is lipoic acid, about 210 milligrams a day. Second, green tea. When haven't you heard about green tea's benefits? It's wonderful. It also helps with insulin. And then vanadyl sulfate again. Vanadyl sulfate actually mimics the effects of insulin a little bit. So it allows the body to adjust with its insulin receptors. So lipoic acid, green tea, and vanadyl will improve insulin sensitivity. The third thing we have to do is prevent glycation. Now, I could do a whole seminar just on glycation alone. It's a very complex process. So I'm going to try to explain it in some simple terms here so you can understand how devastating this toxic reaction called glycation, how toxic it really is. Basically, it's a dangerous reaction between blood sugar and critical body proteins. Glucose, blood sugar, binds to body protein and basically ruins the protein. Now, this is important because, you guys, proteins pretty much run your entire body. The beating of your heart, the activation of a nerve cell, that's all run by proteins for the most part. So when glucose binds to a protein and ruins the protein, things like your heart begins to break down, your nerves begin to break down. That process is called glycation. It's a very dangerous consequence of too much blood sugar. So we have to prevent glycation.